Kick it.
Ahoy, mateys, and welcome aboard to This Week in Nickelodeon History. I'm your captain, Captain Eric, and it's a pleasure to have you here as we celebrate some Nickelodeon anniversaries that have taken place in between the times of December 11th to December 17th. And this week we're starting out 27 years ago on December 16th, 1995. Technically, the final episode of the Ren and Stimpy show aired on Nickelodeon. I say technically because A Scooter for Yaxmas, which was the final episode that ever aired as a new episode on the channel, that was it. No more new episodes of the Ren and Stimpy show until a year later, on October 20th, 1996, a new episode of the Ren and Stimpy show aired on MTV. Well, how could that be? What happened? Well, it is actually the last two episodes produced of the Ren and Stimpy show that for some reason were just taken off of Nickelodeon's networks and moved over onto MTV, with an ironic twist to this that the first half of this episode, Sammy and Me, would eventually air on Nickelodeon in the year 2000. I'm guessing a part of some celebration. They don't usually air Ren and Stimpy on the main Nickelodeon channel unless there's some sort of reasoning or celebration happening. That's why I think the Christmas episode that we're actually talking about today, A Scooter for Yaxmas, I think is the one episode of the Ren and Stimpy show to have the most airtime on Nickelodeon since its final run. The Ren and Stimpy show was created by John Kay, but there are so many other influences behind the show that we can talk about, like my man Bob Camp, who I have mentioned this story a few times, and I'll just briefly mention it here, but I met Bob Camp at a convention a few years ago and had him make a drawing for me, which he impressively knew the scene I was talking about just from a few words. And to get the notification from your drawing being done, you leave your phone number and they send you a text message. For some reason, I kept that text message conversation, and I think a year or two after that convention, I accidentally texted that number as if it was my ex, and I had a wonderful little conversation with either Mr. or Mrs. Bob Camp, and I profusely apologized. I didn't send anything nasty. I just said, "Hey, boo," and they were just confused by it. And then I said, "I love you," and they said, "We love you too. Love is all there is." And that's when I realized, wait, that's not who I'm texting. And oh my goodness, I just texted Bob Camp. Certainly a story I will take to the grave with me, one that I'll never forget, and I can't apologize to the wonderful couple enough over that transgression. But yeah, Bob Camp, a wonderful hand behind the Ren and Stimpy show, who helped develop the show right alongside John Kay, and really in its later seasons too was the lead after John was let go. And of course, we need to talk about Billy West. Billy West, who brought life to Ren and Stimpy. And I am aware that earlier in the series, John Kay provided the voice of Ren himself. But he took that voice from Billy. It was off of Billy's handling of both characters that sold the show to the executives. And after it was sold, John decided, I'll just do the Ren voice myself, and just took over the part anyway, which would eventually revert back to Billy West. Now, John Kay would eventually get to reboot Ren and Stimpy in 2003 with Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon. And if you really want to know my opinions about Adult Party Cartoon, I'll be completely honest with you and say that I think it's one of the most abysmal animated properties I've ever seen in my life. And certainly, obviously, my connection with Nickelodeon and how much I enjoy it has a little bit to do with that, but there's a deeper level of artistic understanding with Adult Party Cartoon that I want to bring up here. I hate this idea that every single artist, someone who's creative, works best outside of restrictions, works best on their own. And certainly there are those out there who can claim that, hey, without any sort of restriction, any sort of rule, even personal ones, they make their best art. But to claim that that's just always going to be the way to go is wrong. John Kay and Ren and Stimpy are perfect examples of things that work better within restrictions. It's within the restrictions of making children's television that John Kay, in my opinion, and I honestly think the opinion of most people, created his best work. And although he hates being within those restrictions, hey, pressure makes a diamond. You know what I'm saying? Like, it helped produce better work for him than when we had Ren and Stimpy with no filter, no restrictions, and it literally is unfunny. And it almost hurts how unfunny it is. And then when scenes from that show get passed around today on social media and presented as if Nickelodeon was producing that trash in the 90s, get that out of here. None of that. All of the respect in the world to Eric Bauza, who was the voice for Stimpy, an adult party cartoon. But another thing here, you can't have Ren and Stimpy without Billy West. If someone else has to play the voice of Ren, we've had that. We can deal with that. No one can replace Stimpy. It's just fact at this point. I haven't heard another voice actor be able to reproduce that voice to the same. It's like a note. It's a perfect note that is struck on a guitar, and no one else has been able to strike that perfect note. I'm telling you, as someone who has listened long enough to Billy West's voice, I can tell the difference between these notes. And there's just, when there's one of them that's off, the other one doesn't work. You can have John Kay as Ren, and you have anyone else as Stimpy, and it just falls apart. But hey, Billy West can play both characters. Isn't that lucky enough for us? So there is another reboot of Ren and Stimpy coming out at some point. I think on Comedy Central. It's not scheduled to be a part of Nickelodeon. And the one thing that does bother me about this, and I'm open to being surprised, the company behind the animation of the reboot is not going to be the Nickelodeon Animation Studio as originally intended, but another company going by the name of Awesome Incorporated, who were behind some of the animation of Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell, Squidbillies, Aqua Teen Hunger Force in its later seasons, and those are a lot of properties that have a lot of stiff animation, and Ren and Stimpy is the farthest thing from modern day digital stiff kind of animation. And even when there is fluid movement, you can still tell it's on a digital front. I'm open to whatever they have cooking. I'm going to be worried regardless on who's making that stew, that beef stew, that Ren and Stimpy beef stew. I'm going to be worried for whoever is the chef behind that pot. But as far as we know, Billy West is 100% back as both Ren and Stimpy, and even some of the original writers and creative force behind the scenes are back, including Bob Camp, although John Kay is left out of this kitchen, and maybe that's for the best, because honestly, I think we've all had enough of the adult party cartoon that could come along when that guy is around. As far as Ren and Stimpy is concerned, it's the most classic Nickelodeon show you can really point to. It's that, Rugrats. I know Doug is right up there as the first Nicktoon. Those three are as iconic as you can get with this network, and unfortunately, they can't really advertise Doug as much as I'm sure they would want to, but with Rugrats and Ren and Stimpy left over, I think there's enough still. If you have never watched Ren and Stimpy, I'm not saying watch the Christmas episode first. Go ham. Sit down with your favorite log, open up a can of powdered toast, and enjoy yourself some Ren and Stimpy. I think you're going to enjoy regardless on what episode you watch. 23 years ago, on December 12th, 1999, we had the final episode of the original Figure It Out, created by Kevin Kay and Magda Leolis. The show ran for, in its total run, 6 seasons of 233 episodes. I'm not sure how many were of the original. Let me see if there's a breakdown here. Originally, there was 4 seasons from 1997 until 1999. The total point of Figure It Out is to bring on a child contestant with some sort of skill or collection or something that makes them unique or special. And through a guessing game of contestants made up of Nickelodeon All-Stars, get a chance to ask yes or no questions to this child to see if they could guess what it is that brings them to figure it out. And over the course of the round, they are given various clues, but the whole ultimate point of this show is, of course, to get people messy. And once the second round kicks into play, the secret slime action is activated. When this is activated, only the audience and the viewers at home get to know what the secret slime action happens to be. It could be simply something as touching your nose, touching your face, moving your arm, putting your arm above your head, wearing a hat, and it could be very specific, like when Steve Burns was once on Figure It Out, they made the secret slime action having a blue dog. So, at some point Steve is just going to get slimed, and then the fun comes in as to when that's just going to happen. The other ones, you never really know when it's going to happen. It could be never, it could be, well, eventually somebody will force someone like, hey, can you just touch your nose? And then the sliming occurs. But anyway, the prizes can stack up for the child if they are able to stump the contestants. If they are able to keep them away for, I think it's 3 rounds, they end up with more prizes. The quicker they get their answers guessed, the less prizes they'll win. And then they get to show off whatever they have that they brought. I enjoyed Figure It Out. The original run was brought to us by Summer Sanders. My heart, love me some Summer. It's not my favorite time of the year, but she may be one of my favorite Nickelodeon hosts ever. She just had a warmness to her that not many hosts had. I have no idea. If you've never seen any of the original Figure It Out, I can't recommend it enough. It's a great game show. Give it some time. 22 years ago, on December 17th, 2000, the final episode of Noah Knows Best premiered on Nickelodeon. The comedy was created by Ken Littman and ran for 1 season of 13 episodes. 18 years ago, on December 17th, 2004, the Nickelodeon movie A Series of Unfortunate Events... Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. I gotta give this guy some credit. Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events premiered in theaters. Directed by Brad Silberling, the movie is based off of the long-running A Series of Unfortunate Events books, and the movie is actually broken up of the first 3 books kind of crammed together into one story. And I gotta tell you, I've mentioned not reading many book series throughout my podcast. I've read books before, but I'm not an avid reader. I don't necessarily look to read. But when these books were coming out, this would be the longest running series that had my attention. I think I got to book 6 or 7 before I tapped out and didn't finish the series. And when this movie came out, I was actually caught up on all of the books, and I was able to go into this movie knowing what was going to happen, what to expect, what expectations were going to be shifted with some of the characters in my head and then seeing them as actors on screen. Jim Carrey, though, oh my goodness, came in like a force of nature as Count Olaf. Not in my wildest dreams could I have imagined Jim Carrey as Count Olaf, but once I saw the first trailer, he changed my opinion. And even his appearances as the other characters. Count Olaf himself is an actor trying to steal the fortune of these orphans that have been placed in his care, but he realizes that he won't have control of their money, so he's continually trying to eviscerate them and has to follow them from place to place as they're getting tossed around as orphans from location to location. And Count Olaf adopts new personas in every new location to try to court the orphans into his control. And truly, it's from this that Jim Carrey then becomes a genius level choice for Count Olaf when he brings his level of comedy to these characters. It's unforgettable. Unfortunately, the movie did not do well enough at the box office to warrant a continuation. It was made on a budget of roughly 140 to 142 million, but made $211.5 million at the box office. To me, hey, that's a success, but also that budget does not count in how much they spent advertising the movie, and it's due to this that we never really know how much movies actually make and don't make, or if they break even. There's Hollywood accounting, as they call it, which is just, there's always numbers being fudged and somebody's getting screwed out of something. And there's movies that have made 500% more than their budget that executives will tell you were box office bombs because of whatever reason. It's crazy. So when you get into that whole realm, it's an entirely new world of crazy that even Count Olaf would go, whoa, guys, settle down here. I know I'm trying to steal children and steal their money and dress up in all these goofy costumes, but Hollywood accounting? This is crazy. If you are a fan of the series or have never heard of it, if you like to read, I can certainly recommend the books. I have read a good chunk of them, so personally, from the captain, they are a good read. If you have no time for reading whatsoever, the entire series has been adapted as a television series beautifully on Netflix. I have to say, the Netflix run was wonderful, and it was great to finally see those other books that, I went through that process as a kid, seeing those first 3 books adapted as a movie and seeing those characters. Hey, how would this play out as an actual movie? And I was left with so many other experiences in this series to my imagination. I never had anything to point to of like, oh, that's how it should look like. So being able to see so many of these other stories adapted finally and in this cohesive manner was great. I enjoyed the series. I can't recommend it enough, even though it's not Nickelodeon, but it's Nickelodeon related. And one other Nickelodeon related movie that we get to talk about premiered 16 years ago on December 15th, 2006. The live action adaptation of Charlotte's Web premiered in theaters. Directed by Gary Winnick, the movie was made on a budget of $85 million and produced $150 million at the box office. 15 years ago, on December 16th, 2007, Unfabulous finished its run on Nickelodeon. Created by Sue Rose, the Emma Roberts show ran for 3 seasons of 41 episodes. 13 years ago, on December 11th, 2009, the first ever Nickelodeon Halo Awards premiered on Teen Nick. And even though this season of the show, I'm only really covering Nickelodeon properties on the main Nickelodeon channel, the Halo Awards eventually became a big enough commodity that they moved the entire award show from Teen Nick over to Nickelodeon proper. So just want to bookend the start of the Halo Awards, since only a few weeks ago we just talked about the end. So honestly, it's the only reason I'm talking about it here. And since it started on Teen Nick, I'm not really going to waste more time, since I went into an in-depth look at the Halo Awards when we spoke about its finale. So check out episode 36 of This Week in Nickelodeon History if you would like to know more about the Nickelodeon Halo Awards. But 8 years ago, on December 15th, 2014, React to That premiered on Nickelodeon. Developed for Nickelodeon by Nick Cannon and Benny and Rafi Fine, or the Fine Brothers, better known together collectively for their well-known reaction videos on YouTube, and also that one time that they just tried to, monetize the word react. Since they were the first ones to really put together an entire YouTube channel and industry around reactions, you might as well just own the word flat out so no one else can do it. Right, guys? I know that's what they were thinking. And the internet caught them. And I'm not a fan. Not a fan whatsoever. When someone becomes too greedy to that extent, enough's enough. You've made an empire, literally, of taking other things and putting a camera on other people and getting their reaction. You've made a career off of that, and it isn't enough. It just isn't enough. You're the most well-known in the practice, but we just got to own the name. Nah, never going to be forgotten about. Never going to be forgiven. And the show only ran for one season of 13 episodes. Something I would much rather talk about. 110%. 7 years ago, not that this was the final episode, but just in general, the subject matter, the person at hand, love them. 7 years ago, the final episode of Nick News aired on December 15th, 2015. Created by Linda Ellerby. The show got its start all the way back in 1992 on April 18th and ran through that entire time. Linda Ellerby was a voice on Nickelodeon for kids who were at least even somewhat interested in what was going on in the world. Not necessarily that you had to get your news from Nickelodeon, but if you were someone like me and this was one channel that, no matter where you found yourself in the world to be at, you were destined to find a TV that had Nickelodeon, it was comfort. And Linda Ellerby and her presentation, her voice, her presence was always comfortable. And made some very, not so great topics digestible for a young mind. And I certainly wasn't watching Nick News on a religious basis or every single time it was on. But if there was ever a topic that caught my attention, or if there was something big happening in the world and Nick News was going to cover it, that's where I was going to be watching. That's where I was going to be getting my information from, at least up until a certain point, and then I moved on to The Daily Show. But honestly, Linda Ellerby has my heart. 43 years in journalism before retiring in 2015. And for so much of that time devoted for bringing the world to the young audience, I have to say, just, I can't applaud someone enough for that effort. It doesn't have to be even for Nickelodeon. I'm not saying that because of my love for Nickelodeon. Just the idea that somebody was devoting that amount of time for their life, and with the aspect of trying to present it to a young audience, that right there, I love that. Thank you, Linda, for your work. Thank you for every single ounce of yourself that you poured into Nick News, and thank you for making so much of the world understandable and digestible. I speak on behalf of an entire generation. Thank you, Linda Ellerby.
Thank you!
2 years ago, on December 17th, 2020, we had the final episode of Top Elf on Nickelodeon, a reality competition show created by Mike and Tim Duffy. The show ran for 2 seasons of 10 episodes. A bunch of kids trying to compete to see who is going to be Santa's next top elf. Great. Trying to earn a job where you have to work for a guy all year long. No breaks, no vacations, but that one day a year, Christmas Day, is your day off, and you get paid in cookies and hot cocoa. Make toys all day. I guess that would be the life. You know what, Santa? Send me an application. I think I would sign up for that. Also on the same day, the final episode of Unleashed premiered on Nickelodeon on December 17th, 2020. Another reality competition show presented by Gabriel Iglesias, and was all about dogs, if the name Unleashed wasn't enough of a bell for you.
Obviously.
The show only ran for one season of 10 episodes, and also on the same day, the dark day of Nickelodeon on December 17th, 2020, the final episode of the revived All That premiered on Nickelodeon. All That was created by Mike Tollin and Nickelodeon CEO and President Brian Robbins, and in its entirety ran for 11 seasons of 206 episodes. All That is essentially Saturday Night Live for kids. It's live sketch comedy with young actors interacting with older actors, just completely goofy characters, wacky scenarios, and especially with this third iteration of All That, a return of some of the original cast members, not only coming back to help the new cast out, bringing back their old characters to get back that old audience, but also executive produced by two of the greatest members of the All That cast, Kenan Thompson and Kel Mitchell. Kenan Thompson, who has been on Saturday Night Live for, as far as I know, the longest of any cast member in the history of that show. Kenan Thompson has had longevity in terms of live action sketch comedy, going all the way back from the original run in 1994. So coming back to executive produce this new run was a no-brainer. Unfortunately, the pandemic kind of came and struck this thing, I'm sure, at a time where maybe also ratings weren't just as big as they could have been, but I don't think that was going to solve the problem of not being able to make a live action sketch comedy show when the entire nation is in lockdown. So everything just ended. I think they had a great show that they were running. The cast, I felt like, had some gems, some actors that had undeniable charisma, and I wasn't watching every single episode, but anytime there was a sketch that involved one of those old characters and it showed up on YouTube, I would check it out. And I was impressed usually with some of the new faces that would pop up. And it was nice to see them interact with some of those older cast members. It was this nice legacy that we didn't get to see too much of in the second iteration of All That. When they first revived it, when they first had a whole new, brand new cast out of the gate. And they only interacted with that original cast, I think, when there was the 10th anniversary special, amidst a few guest appearances here and there, but they weren't like a main part of the show, whereas in this whole new iteration, it wouldn't be crazy to see Josh Server or Lori Beth Denberg on a sketch every other episode, bringing the librarian back, or Detective Dan. So I have a lot of love for All That. It was a shame to see it go yet again, but I have a suspicion that there will always be a place for All That on Nickelodeon. I don't think it'll ever truly go away, and I hope it continues on and on and on and on, just like the song of our next entry. 2 years ago, on December 11th, 2020, Baby Shark's big show premiered on Nickelodeon. Baby Shark is a song that was on YouTube, just one of these YouTube channels that makes children's songs ad nauseum, because that is what brings in the big ad revenue on YouTube, baby. Yeah, not anymore. Good. All of these degenerates making YouTube channels, just songs and action figures and puppets and all this stuff designed just to trap kids into watching their content for hours on end so they can capture all of that ad revenue. It's disgusting. Baby Shark, though, was a nursery rhyme out of one of these channels that I would say like existed in that pool. But Baby Shark became so popular outside of that it became a mainstream song everybody was singing. It was such a phenomenon that, of course, Nickelodeon was like, hey, let's make a show. Let's make a Baby Shark show. And Baby Shark's big show certainly premiered. It's still ongoing as far as I know. It's currently in its second season, and it has 47 episodes.
Wow.
And last but certainly not least, 1 year ago on December 16th, 2021, the TV movie California Dreamin' premiered on Nickelodeon. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that is all of the anniversaries that we have to celebrate for this week. But it is time for my top 5 of the week. That's right. My top 5 is going to be my top 5 All That characters. And although you would think it might be cheap that I picked all original characters, most of these did reappear on the new iteration of All That. So even though we celebrated the newest iteration of All That, most of these characters still count. And, you know, who cares? It's my top 5. I can do whatever I want. Just like my number 5 here on this list of top 5 All That characters, I'm talking about the classic Danny Tamborelli character, Jack Campbell, Fat Cop. The whole point of Jack Campbell was for this fat police officer to break your doorway, rummage through the wrong house that he was called to, or if it was the right house he was called to to not assess any of the situation as to why he was called in the first place, but to just rummage through your kitchen, through your fridge, any other hidey hole of food that you have in your house. Jack Campbell is going to find it. And I don't know. I know it's low-hanging fruit of a character. It's not that I'm, oh my goodness, super against police officers. As a kid, just the idea of you calling the police and this guy showing up had my full attention. It's funny. It's still funny. And if you can't find the humor of it, then you can leave.
You need to leave.
Number 4 is one of the most iconic All That characters in the history of the show and was beautifully brought back for its revival. I'm talking about Lori Beth Denberg's Loud Librarian. Everyone and their mother knows the trope of the librarian who wants to keep it quiet in the library and will shush even the most quiet conversation happening in the room. Until you meet this librarian who will scream at you through a megaphone for you to be quiet even though you're whispering, and then will grab a chainsaw to start making some driftwood art right in the middle of the library. The joke of the Loud Librarian is one that you can retell over and over and over again, and it'll still be funny because of the performance of Lori Beth. It is her greatest character. I'm sure she will agree to that. I mean, it's character that has legitimate legs in comedy because it's not just the idea of a loud librarian. Okay, that's simple. It's the entire persona of this character, the attitude she brings to her job, and then literally the comedic performance of the way Lori Beth is able to go from bit to bit with this character. It always makes me laugh. It always makes me break. I would not be able to last in a setting with the Loud Librarian. I would simply just, I would laugh my head off. Number 3 is a personal favorite of mine. I am a bit of a Frenchman myself, and as a young French boy, I was being taught everyday French with a little Pierre Escargot in my life. Pierre Escargot was played by Kenan Thompson and was a character who donned a yellow raincoat, sat in a bathtub filled with bubbles, had flippers on that you would use if you were swimming in the ocean or in like scuba gear, and would recite complete gibberish that sounded like real French, and then would go over what the translation was, and it usually was something completely ridiculous that would be a weird sentence even if you were able to speak the actual French. Like, the translation could be, "Why is your grandmother's toilet coming out of my turkey?" Huh? And then he would laugh. It's a classic joke set for me that as long as you fill in the blanks, it's like playing Mad Libs. You're filling in the blanks, and as long as it's funny enough, the actual presentation is already an A+ for me. I love Kenan in the tub. Ooh, wait a minute. Now that's sounding a bit saucy. I'm just saying, I like Pierre Escargot in that setting right there. I'm not saying anything about the man Kenan, although if he's listening, I'm just a little flustered right now in my thoughts. Yeah, I absolutely love Pierre Escargot. It always felt from the get-go, being told I was French and then hearing this French speak on Nickelodeon, I was like destined to love this character. Number 2 is another character that was brought back for the revival and is one that if I was asked to write an All That sketch, this would be the first character I would want to write for. But I'm talking about Josh Server and the classic Detective Dan. Detective Dan is a play on a Columbo-esque kind of detective. That guy who can go into the crime scene and single-handedly take care of everything without even moving a finger, without even really breaking a sweat, although Detective Dan goes into a situation and makes everything actively worse. Of course, that's kind of the point with all these characters. They're a spin on what kids expect these people to act like, you know? You would expect that a cop or a librarian or a detective would act differently, and that's the play on things, that these characters go in and act in a completely opposite way than how you should. And that's simple. That's easy. Anyone can go in and be a rogue, weird detective, but Josh Server and his presentation as Detective Dan, the voice, unforgettable. At some point in my future, I'm going to be in a nursing home where I'm going to dress up for Halloween in a trench coat, and I'm going to go around and say, I'm Detective Dan. It's still going to be around years later, so thank you to Josh for bringing that character to the world. Number one, though, should be pretty obvious to any All That fan. It's the greatest All That character that ever existed. It's a character that should at this point have transcended even his actor on Nickelodeon's terms and should be represented in these fighting games. He should be represented in the racing games. He should be represented in more media. I'm talking about Ed from Good Burger. It's the greatest All That sketch. It's the greatest character. And without Kel Mitchell, it doesn't work. I know that anybody could adopt a dumb guy persona. Oh, I could play this bit, but no. There is a level of spice that you're missing that Kel Mitchell brings to the table that makes Ed just unforgettable. That's why they're making a Good Burger sequel at all. It's not just for Keenan and Kel. It's that Ed as a character still to this day is incredibly popular with my generation. And I think with the younger generation too, who grew up with Good Burger sketches still being made on All That, and Ed just being as quotable as ever. And shout out to Kel and Keenan for bringing back Keenan and Kel for a sketch on Saturday Night Live, which we already mentioned on this episode, but this past Saturday, they had Kiki Palmer hosting Saturday Night Live, who was True Jackson VP here on Nickelodeon. So shout out to Kiki. Congratulations on the pregnancy. And they brought back Keenan and Kel in the Rigby set in a beautifully dark way, and I had a blast. So shout out to Kel, shout out to Keenan, shout out to Ed, and shout out to each and every one of you out there. We're at 37 minutes. Oh boy. You know what that means. It's time for Captain Eric to sign off. But if you would like to reach out to the captain, you can do so at nickelodeonhistory@gmail.com. If you have any sort of questions, suggestions, anything you'd like me to read out on the show, you can find me there. If you'd like to find me on Twitter, at I'm Ready Podcast, and on Instagram, at SpongeBob Podcast. You can also find yourself the This Week in Nickelodeon History logo on a multitude of different products. If you click the Redbubble link in the podcast description below, you can also find a few other logos associated with Captain Eric. Buy them on a shirt, buy it on a sticker, buy it on a hat. Anything that comes in from my projects goes directly back into my projects, and it's always appreciated. I love you guys. Thank you for joining me on This Week in Nickelodeon History, and I hope you join me on next week. As always, please stay safe, be kind to one another, and come aboard again to another episode of This Week in Nickelodeon History.
I'm here with my friends, Nickelodeon, the